This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Bruchim Abam, welcome everyone. This is our final share before Chag Pesach, Chabalin L'Toiva, wishing everyone a Chag Kosher V'Sameach. We have, just to begin, some important announcements. Firstly, we're now working on Mesiyata D'Shmaya, the upcoming Haggadah for Art Scroll for 5783. If anybody wants to be Mishtatev, then that's available. And we actually have some very amazing essays and samples of the upcoming Haggadah for anybody who would like to participate. Also, if you haven't heard the breaking news, we launched Be'ezus Hashem, the new international headquarters of our Kehillah, which Be'ezus Hashem will also have the studios to film all the Shiurim and broadcast all the Shiurim. So wherever you may be, whether you're in New York or the United States of America, or B'chol Makom Sha'ata Sham, please consider our shul, your shul. Please consider our Beis HaMedrash, your Beis HaMedrash, and please help us be able to move in so that we could bring the Shiurim to more Yidden and share the Torah and elevate ourselves together with the Hisayrus of the Torah HaKadoshah. Okay, so we're continuing the Wednesday night Shiurim. And of course, Sefer Vayikra is generously sponsored by our dear friends, Dr. Zakheim Umeshpachta, L'iloi Nishmas, Rav Shlomo Eliezer ben Rav Yaakov Zakheim, and L'iloi Nishmas, Dr. Zakheim's mother, Rivka Bas Tuvia Halevi, their Neshama Shnav and Aliyah. They should be Melitza Yesharim for their whole family, Ad B'Yaskal Tzedek. And tonight's shir is sponsored by my dear friend, Rav Kenny Pinsauer, the author of the acclaimed Sefer Ein Oid Movadai, Refuah Shalema for his mother, Dina Bas Chana. She should have a Refuah Shalema B'Karov, B'Soich Sharcha Yisrael. Okay, so we have an amazing shir, and the idea of tonight's shir is actually very inspiring to me, because, you know, in the Sefer on Pesach, there's a maimer about the authorship of the Haggadah Shel Pesach. And as we're going to see, the authorship of the Haggadah Shel Pesach is shrouded in mystery. And I found a source that attributes the authorship to a great individual. And there's a whole essay on the subject, what's the connection between this individual and the Haggadah. And I thought, wow, I really dug beneath the surface and I discovered something. And I was, I thought I hit right, the extent of what's available to. And then this year, B'siyata D'Shmaya, and with the help of some chaverim, we uncovered another 9 approaches to the authorship of the Haggadah Shel Pesach. So you could work on something your whole life, and you think after you uncover a little bit, oh wow, I really got this subject, and then you realize you haven't even begun to scratch the surface. So that's what the subject of tonight's shir is. Who is the author of Haggadah Shel Pesach? I'm sure you're going to hear many Divrei Torah over Pesach. Your kids are going to come home with Divrei Torah, gematrios, stories that never happened, stories that will happen one day, stories that will never happen, gematrios that don't work, gematrios that do work, gematrios that never worked. But who the author of the Haggadah is, that is always shrouded in mystery. And let us begin with Maramakoim number 1, and that is the Haggadah Shel Pesach, Beis HaShoeva, Reb Shimon Schwab. And he basically says this compendium, the Haggadah, that's found in every Jewish home, was compiled and composed and redacted by the Baal Haggadah. Who's the Baal Haggadah? Who's this mysterious Baal Haggadah? Nobody has any idea. And it says Reb Schwab, but we know he lived in the times of the Goinim. The Baal Haggadah. Okay, that's the first pshat. Right, Azriel? The first pshat is that the author of the Haggadah is the Baal Haggadah. It's like when you have a zemer and you don't know, or a kina, the Paitan. Who's the Paitan? You have no idea, so you call him the Paitan. So the Baal Haggadah. Then last week we saw, when we spoke about why Moshe Rabbeinu's name is not in the Haggadah Shel Pesach, in the Sefer Kli Chemda, he concludes his Akdama by dealing with a question that somebody asked him, that the Anshe Knesset Hagdoila, they were Mesakin, the Haggadah Shel Pesach, why didn't they mention Moshe Rabbeinu's name? So clearly, the Kli Chemda is learning that the author of the Haggadah Shel Pesach was the Anshe Knesset Hagdoila, right? So that's the second approach, that the authorship of the Haggadah was the Anshe Knesset Hagdoila, which l'chayra is impossible to say. The Anshe Knesset Hagdoila compiled the Haggadah. Let's start from the beginning. Most of the Haggadah are Mishnayos. That's after the Anshe Knesset Hagdoila. Even though we know that the Mishnayos did exist before, even in times of Moshe Rabbeinu, they had Mishnah, and especially Ma Nishtana is a Stam Mishnah. It's not Ma Nishtana Laila, what are the four kashas? Or Meir says this, or says everybody, it's a Stam Mishnah. Stam Mishnah they maybe always had. But how can you say the Anshe Knesset Hagdoila composed the Haggadah? Really? They composed Maisa, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Azariah, Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Tad, they all are after the Rabbi Yehuda, Yanoisim Hem Simanim, the Tzach Hadash Ba'achav. He's after, which Rabbi Yehuda is that? It's Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai. Stam Rabbi Yehuda is Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai. He's after the Anshe Knesset. Rabban Gamliel Hayomer, Kol Shel Yomar. I mean, that's after. So, to say the Anshe Knesset Hagdoila, now I don't know that the Kli Chemda is definitively saying it was written by the Anshe Knesset Hagdoila. He's just sort of quoting the questioner. But you almost would think that it's such almost an impossibility. He would say, by the way, the Anshe Knesset Hagdoila didn't compose the Haggadah. I mean, they formulated the structure, maybe the drashos, but even the drashos are mechilta. Right? Did they formulate that? The Sifri, did they formulate that? It's hard to say the Anshe Knesset, especially there's so many Mishnayos, Rabban Gamliel, Hillel, Kach Hoya Hillel Lois, that's Anshe Knesset Hagdoila. So that is the second approach, the Anshe Knesset Hagdoila. Then some suggest, and I don't think this has a good source at all, the Sefer Sharei Chaim, and this was sent to me by a friend, Daniel Weinstein. Some say Moshe Rabbeinu put together the Haggadah. Say Moshe Rabbeinu put together the Haggadah. How come Moshe Rabbeinu... And that's why his name is not in it. In his great humility, he didn't put his name in the Haggadah, even though his name is in the Haggadah. Moshe put together the Haggadah. Moshe wrote Manishtana. Moshe wrote Maisa, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabban Gamliel, not Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfain. Moshe wrote that. Moshe wrote Rabbi Yehuda Hayanoisim Hem Simanim. It's very difficult to say that Moshe composed the Haggadah, but that's such an approach. I don't know of any legitimate source. I don't think it has a legitimate source that Moshe wrote the Haggadah. So now let's come to the pshat that we've always said all the years, because tonight we're saying 10 approaches, so we have to review that approach as well, and that is in the Haggadah Shel Pesach, Tzemach Menachem. I originally saw this in the Haggadah of Rabbi Avram Shor, and I then got a hold of, at least I had access to the Haggadah Tzemach Menachem, and by Rav Aaron Menachem Mendel Guterman, or Nashlusk, or Minashlusk, he brings, it's an interesting thing. We make a big deal about Eliyahu at the Seder. First we have this cup. What's the cup? I don't know. Not the first. Not the cup. Koishel Eliyahu. Some say the pshat is like this. It's machlokes rishonim. Should he have 4 cups or 5 cups? The Rif says 5 cups. So we don't know what to do. What do we do when we don't know what to do? Teku. So we call it Koishel Eliyahu. When he comes, he'll let us know whether we're supposed to have the 5th cup or not. But we call it the Kais of Eliyahu. And then we open the door. Who are we opening the door for? The Ramah doesn't say we open it for Eliyahu, even though they like to quote him that way. The Ramah just says we open the door to show we have trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it's Mekubal that we open the door for Eliyahu. And even though Eliyahu could drink the wine without us shaking the table, nevertheless, we assist him in drinking the wine by shaking the table. Eliyahu only drinks the wine when you shake the table, obviously. Okay. Then we say Shvei Chamoscha, and we say Baruch Haba. Many people say Baruch Haba. So we have a tradition. Eliyahu comes. What's he coming to the Seder for? Not a bris. There's no bris at the Seder. Why is Eliyahu? Oh, he doesn't have a bris because there are no bagels on Pesach, so he has more time. So he comes to the Seder. Why is Eliyahu Hanavi coming to the Seder? The answer is, says the Haggadah Menachem, because he heard from the great Rebbe, Rav Simcha Bunim of Parsha, that anybody who's familiar with the language of Tana Debei Eliyahu will see immediately that the Haggadah was written in the same style of Tana Debei Eliyahu, especially Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu. Tana Debei Eliyahu is full of Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu. So therefore, since Eliyahu wrote the Haggadah, and the Haggadah Tzach Menachem brings an idea that we like to speak about a lot, and that is the miracles of Yetzias Mitzrayim were the pre-enactment and the Maseh Avos Siman Labanim for the Gula HaSida, that we know anytime Hashem accomplishes great things, Hashem first does a trial run, a dress rehearsal, Maseh Avos Siman Labanim. So the Maseh Avos Siman Labanim of the Gula HaSida is Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's what it means in the Navi Amais, Ki Meitzeischa Me'eretz Mitzrayim, Arenu Neflois. So who better to write the handbook of what the future redemption will look like than Elijah the prophet? Because since anyway he's going to come redeem us, so he wrote the book with which HaKadosh Baruch Hu used as a pre-enactment to bring the Gula. And in our humble Sefer, we explained that's the reason why when Moshe Rabbeinu was asked by God, take the Jews out of Egypt, Moshe said what? Shlach na bi'at tishlach, send who you usually send. We know Rashi says that was referring to Aaron. And the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel says, send Eliyahu. He says, Biva'u barachamin min kadamach Hashem, shalach kedoin shlichusach biyad pinchas, techami lemishtalcha besoif yoimaya. Send Eliyahu. Why is Moshe Rabbeinu asking to send Eliyahu? Because since anyway, Eliyahu is going to take the Jewish people out of the final galus, so he might as well do the pre-enactment. He might as well start off the job. So Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, God, why do you want me to take them out of Egypt? If the whole purpose of taking them out of Mitzrayim is to bring the Gula HaSida, and I'm not going to bring the Gula HaSida, it's going to be Eliyahu, so let Eliyahu take them out of Mitzrayim. So the third approach to who wrote the Haggadah is none other than Eliyahu Hanavi. So we have so far, actually the fourth approach. Number one, who wrote the Haggadah? The Baal Haggadah. The mysterious Baal Haggadah. Who is he? When you see him, you'll know who he is. He carries a pin. It says on it, I am the Baal Haggadah. You know, that he has a business card that's real. It says, he's the Baal Haggadah. The second shot is Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. Third approach, Moshe Rabbeinu. And I would say a more legitimate tradition it was written by Eliyahu Hanavi. Okay? And so far, most of this is information that we know already. And now we begin some new chidushim. Comes the great Gaon of Izmir, Reb Chaim Falaji, in the Sefer Zechira L'Chaim. And Reb Chaim Falaji says, now this is his perush on the Haggadah. What's the Haggadah? Haggadah Shel Pesach. He calls the Haggadah Haggadah. And he said, I was asked, who wrote the Haggadah? He said, what do you mean? Look in the Yushalmi in Shkalim, that it says, who wrote Haggadahs? Some say Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, and some say Rabbi Akiva. Says Reb Chaim Falaji, the Ikar is, Rabbi Akiva wrote Haggadah Shel Pesach. Rabbi Akiva. You knew that? I never heard that before. Rabbi Akiva wrote the Haggadah. In fact, Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef in the Yalkut Yosef, Chela Gimel, my good friend, he sent me the Yalkut Yosef, and I went to the store to get the Yalkut Yosef. I mean, I don't have all the volumes, but to get the Yalkut Yosef on Pesach, you have to buy 3 big volumes. So it's in the middle of Chela Gimel. These are big books, and he brings down from Reb Chaim Falaji that the author of Haggadah Shel Pesach is none other than Rabbi Akiva. Now, the printer of this particular work of Reb Chaim Falaji, his name was Avraham Pontrimoli. And he said, in his opinion, the Reb Chaim Falaji is correct. Rabbi Akiva must have written the Haggadah. Why? Because Chazal say that when Moshe Rabbeinu told God, Shlach na b'yad tishlach, I don't want to take them out of Mitzrayim, send the one who you usually send. Chazal say, who is Moshe referring to? Rabbi Akiva. Moshe said to Hashem, what are you sending me? Why don't you send Rabbi Akiva? Now that's a Pella. Rashi says he meant send Aaron. Tam Yonasim Nazil says he meant send Eliyahu. And now the printer of Reb Chaim Falaji is saying, Chazal say that Hashem, Moshe Rabbeinu said, send Rabbi Akiva. Why Rabbi Akiva? Because Rabbi Akiva lived in the time of Churban. And Rabbi Akiva suffered during Churban more than anyone else ever suffered in history. They raked his flesh with iron combs. And all Golus is rooted in Mitzrayim. So if there's anybody who wants to get the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim, it's Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva suffered from Egypt more than anyone else in history, because he suffered in Golus, and all Golus is rooted in Egypt. And therefore, if someone's going to get the Jewish people out of Golus, who would Hashem and who would rather get out of the Golus more than Rabbi Akiva? And therefore, Rabbi Akiva must be the author of Haggadah Shel Pesach. Now, where Reb Chaim Falaji got this from? It's a very unusual perush. I never heard it before. But, we were zeicha to go to Turkey. We went to Reb Chaim Falaji. So he gave us a new chiddush, that Rabbi Akiva wrote the Haggadah Shel Pesach. Now, there's a great Talmid Chacham alive today. His name is Rabbi Yaakov Chaim Sofer. I think the grandson or great-grandson of Rabbi Yaakov Chaim Sofer, the Kaf HaChaim. And this Rabbi Yaakov Chaim Sofer is a big bucky in all the Sfarim. And he quotes this Reb Chaim Falaji. And he says, this is a very big chiddush. And he says, you can't say such a thing. Based on what are we attributing the Haggadah to Rabbi Akiva? He says, based on the Yushalmi, look at the Yushalmi. The Yushalmi says that Rabbi Akiva was Masakein Medrash, Mishnah, Halacha, and Haggadah, and some say Anshe Knesses Hagdayla. So the Mefarshim and the Yushalmi say, what does it mean he was Masakein Medrash? Sifra and Sifri. What does it mean he was Masakein Halachos? These are the dinim that the Amoraim taught. What does it mean he was Masakein Haggadah, Bereshis Rabbah, and Vayikra Rabbah? But not Haggadah Shel Pesach. That's not what it means. Haggadah, that's not what the Yushalmi means. It means the Midrashim. Rabbi Akiva is Masakein Medrash, not the Haggadah Shel Pesach. And he says that if you're going to say that it refers to Haggadah Shel Pesach, are you going to say that the opinion who says it's Anshe Knesses Hagdoila, it's referring to Haggadah Shel Pesach? There's a machlokes. Was it Rabbi Akiva or Anshe Knesses Hagdoila? So if we're discussing the Haggadah, nobody could say Anshe, you see the Kaf HaChaim writes, nobody could even, in the third paragraph, imagine that the Anshe Knesses Hagdoila were Masakein Haggadah Shel Pesach. It's all Tanoim and Amoraim that came much later. And Halach Ma'anya was Niskan in the Golos. So Haggadah clearly means Medrash, not Haggadah Shel Pesach. And furthermore, Chazal don't say anywhere that when Moshe Rabbeinu said Shlach na b'yad tishlach, he meant Rabbi Akiva. Look, where does that come from? There's such a Chazal. Now, I cannot defend his question that the Yushalmi does not mean Haggadah, it means Haggadata. But I do believe there is a Chazal that when Moshe Rabbeinu said, I don't want to take the Jews out of Mitzrayim, he meant send Rabbi Akiva to send them out of Mitzrayim. Because I once said this over maybe 10 years ago. My grandfather brought over from Europe the commentary of the Chidah on Haggadah Shel Pesach, not the regular Chidah that appears in the set. It's called Simchas HaRegel. And the Chidah brings on the part of the Haggadah that says, Afilu kulanu chachamim, kulanu nevoinim, kulanu yoidim es ha-Torah, mitzvah aleinu l'saper b'tzias Mitzrayim. Right? We know even if you're a goyin olam, you're a tzaddik, you know kol ha-Torah kula, you know Shas, Poskim, you even know Art Scroll Yushalmi, let's say. You still have to talk about Yitzias Mitzrayim. So, the Chidah asks, of course you do, why not? So the Chidah says like this, the Arizal teaches if we remained in Mitzrayim for a minute longer, what would have happened? We would have fallen to the point of no return. Why? We would fall to the 50th level of Tumah. Why is the 50th level of Tumah the point of no return? Says the Chidah, it's the point of no return because you always need someone to yank you out of Tumah. And who took us out of Mitzrayim? Moshe. What level of Kedusha was Moshe on? 49, the Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah. Chamishim shari bino nivru ba'olam, kulam nitnu l'Moshe chasar achas. So Moshe had 49. So Moshe could only yank us out of 49. But if we fall to the 50th level, nobody could take us out. Yeah, but what about somebody who reached the 50th? No, but Moshe didn't. Did anybody ever reach the 50th? Avada! Kol yakar rasa einai zu Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva knew the 50th level of Bina. He was greater than Moshe. Moshe had chalishas hadas from Rabbi Akiva. So if Rabbi Akiva was in Mitzrayim, he would have said, let them fall to the 50th. No problem, I'll take care of it. So I would have thought someone like Rabbi Akiva doesn't have to talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim because it wasn't a big deal that God took us out, because Rabbi Akiva could have done it. So the Chidush is, Afilu kulanu chachamim, kulanu nevoinim, kulanu yadazar. Even someone like Rabbi Akiva is on the 50th level of Kedusha, he still has to talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim, even though he could have taken care of the job, even if we fell to the 50th level of Tumah. Says the Chida, my father told me, Chida quotes his father, that's the pshat in Chazal, when Hashem told Moshe, you Moshe, take them out of Egypt. And Moshe said, no, shlach na b'yad tishlach. Let Rabbi Akiva take them out of Egypt. Why did Moshe want Rabbi Akiva to take them out of Egypt? Because Moshe said, God, what's the rush? Why are you rushing me? God said, because they might fall to the 50th and you'll never yank them out. So Moshe says, so what do you want from my life? Let Rabbi Akiva take them out. So here you have explicitly in the Chidah, a Chazal, that when Moshe said, shlach na b'yad tishlach, he meant Rabbi Akiva. Now the Chidah doesn't say where this Chazal is, but if the Chidah quotes Chazal, we could rely on the fact there is such a statement in Chazal. So that is the fifth approach. So number one, who's the author of the Haggadah? The Baal Haggadah. Number two, Anshe Knesset Hagdalah. Number three, Moshe Rabbeinu. Number four, Eliyahu Hanavi. Number five, Rabbi Akiva. Comes Rav Aaron Cutler, and this I want to thank my dear friend Rabbi Rafal Ansel Mitzarfas. He sent me a English copy from a Haggadah, and the good news was I happened to have that Haggadah in Hebrew. The name of the Haggadah is Arzei Halavanayin. When I was a kid, I used to call it the Mount Rushmore Haggadah. Why? Because nowadays it's very common, all the ads have, all these faces. But like 20 years ago, it was a novelty to see Rav Moshe, Rav Aaron, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. I don't remember the six Gedolim. So it looked like, Mount Rushmore. So we used to call it the Mount Rushmore Haggadah. And I bought it in Lashon HaKodesh. Says Rav Aaron, the following question. The Haggadah says, Yachal me Rosh Chodesh. I would have thought you start talking about Yitzchak from Rosh Chodesh. Question. How long before Yom Tif do you have to learn the halachas of a Yom Tif? 1 month, 30 days. But not everybody holds that. We hold that. Shloshim yom kodim hachag, shoylim v'darshim in yonei shel chag. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, we had this in Tainus. We had this in Megillah. Reb Shimon Gamliel says 2 weeks before. Right? The Shulchan, 2 weeks before. So why does the Haggadah say, I would have thought you start learning about the Haggadah Rosh Chodesh? No! I would have thought Yachal, it should say Mi Purim. What's Rosh Chodesh? Why would I think you start saying the Haggadah from Rosh Chodesh? According to Reb Shimon Gamliel, you start learning halacha 2 weeks before, so I would have thought from Rosh Chodesh. Says Rav Aaron Cutler, the author of Haggadah Shel Pesach is Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, who holds you start preparing for Yom Tif 2 weeks before. Says Rav Aaron Cutler, the most geshmak raya. You ready for this raya? Halach ma'anya. Yeah? Everyone says halach ma'anya, yeah? Anybody here? Ashkenazim, Sfardim, we all say halach ma'anya. This is the poor man's bread that our forefathers ate in the land of Egypt. Anyone who's hungry, come and eat. So far, so good. Called ditzrich, anyone who needs, yitzei v'yivsach, join my Korban Pesach. Question. If I shech the Korban Pesach and I say, wow, it's a lot of ribs. Me and my family, we're not going to finish it off. Yankel, why don't you join me for the Korban Pesach? Could you invite someone to Korban Pesach? You can't. we say in Ezel Mekoimon, Einoi Nechal Ela Lemenuyav. You had to have been appointed over the Karban Pesach from the beginning. You can't join after the fact. So how could you say anyone who needs a Karban Pesach, Yesei v'yechal, come and eat? It's too late. So the Gemara says in Pesachim, you can make a Tanai. You could say, I'm shachting Karban Pesach, and whoever joins later, we say Breira. Huvra Davel Mafreya, retroactively, that's who I had in mind from the beginning. It's called Breira. Breira means that a person can say that whoever I choose later was what I had in mind from the beginning. That's Breira. Now, does everybody agree to Breira? There's only one Tana who's really into Breira. Rabban Gamliel. Throughout Shas, he always holds a Breira. For example, says Rav Aaron, in Baba Basra, a tree that grows partly in Eretz Yisrael and partly in Chutz La'aretz. So the Tanakama says it's Tevel and Chulin mixed together. Rav Gamliel says no. We'll determine that what grows in Eretz Yisrael is Chayiv, and Shumas Amazon what grows in Chutz La'aretz is not. We say whatever grows retroactively, that's how it was planted. Or if a Jew and a non-Jew enter a partnership, we could say Breira. Who holds Breira? Reb Shimon Gamliel. Since the author of the Haggadah is Reb Shimon Gamliel, so he holds Breira, so he could say, Kol ditzrich yitzei v'yipsach, and therefore, Yachal me'Rosh Chodesh. Now this is very difficult to say, because Holach Ma'anya was from much later on in history. But that's what Rabbi Aaron says. Rabbi Aaron says that the author of Haggadah Shel Pesach is Reb Shimon Gamliel. This in January, I was zocheh to go to a random Arab village, and we went to the kever of Reb Shimon Gamliel. I didn't know he wrote the Haggadah. If I would have known he wrote the Haggadah, I would have had, I don't know, maybe different kavanas, maybe. Anyway, that's the opinion of Rav Aaron. The next opinion is unbelievable. The next opinion is Seder Rashban. Where did I come to this? Who else? Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef quotes it. The Rashban was Reb Shlomo Tzvi Shik. And Reb Shlomo Tzvi Shik goes through the entire Seder, and he tells you who composed each paragraph and put it into the Seder and when. Now, it's not based on anything other than conjecture. It's just, it's very interesting. For example, he says, Echad mi yodeya, and I never heard this before, was added by the Rambam. I never saw anyone who he... Echad mi yodeya is from the Rambam. Okay. Comes the Rashban, Reb Shlomo Tzvi Shik, and he says the author of Haggadah Shel Pesach is Reb Eliezer ben Horkenes. And he says, the truth is, until this day, not one of the Rishonim, not one of the Achronim, number 10, on the fourth line, ever investigated and clarified who's the Baal Mechaber of the Haggadah. When was it written? In my opinion, it's Reb Eliezer ben Horkenes. Now, Reb Eliezer ben Horkenes was one of the first of the Tanoim. He's the Rebbe of Rabbi Akiva, who's the Rebbe of Rameir. And Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which is the first written Tarsha B'Peh, is from Reb Eliezer ben Horkenes. And says the Rashban, I'm going to bring you 11 proofs that the Haggadah was written by Reb Eliezer ben Horkenes. Now, these proofs span many, 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 many pages, and I cannot say that I can give over all these proofs to you, but I'll give you a taste of a couple of them. Number one, where does the word Haggadah come from? Most people say it comes from the pasuk V'higada talabincha. Nah, he says nonsense. Even though everybody says that, he says nonsense. It can't be, because then why do we say Kol Hamarbe? We should say Kol Hamarbe lehagid b'yitzias Mitzrayim, right? I'm a chayiv lahagid b'yitzizim v'chol hamar lahagid. Why do we say chayiv l'saper v'chol hamar l'saper? I thought the whole night is about Haggadah. No. It has nothing to do with v'higada talabincha, Haggadah. Haggadah means to draw. Where do we say draw? He doesn't give this example, but I would say gurasik, gurachis. In Sukkah, the wall goes up, the wall goes down. Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus translates that the mun meant kizera gad. Now what's the purpose of the mun? The mun is supposed to whet your appetite. So the purpose of the Seder is Haggadah, to draw. You want to draw the attention of your children. You want to do unusual things to elicit their curiosity. So according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus, Gad means to draw, to pull. Next, lechem oini. Give you a few. Why is matzah called lechem oini? So some say, well, you can't bake it with wine and oil and honey. It has to be poor man's bread. The other opinion is, no, it's the bread, lechem sha'oinim alav dvarim harbi. It's the bread you talk a lot about. Now, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus holds you're allowed to put oil and honey and shemen and yayin into the matzah. So he cannot learn lechem oini is poor man's bread, that there are no added ingredients, because he holds you're allowed to add ingredients. So it must be that it's lechem oini. Why? It must be lechem oini, lechem sha'oinim alav dvarim harbe, bread you talk a lot about. Why would you talk a lot about it? Because he's the author of the Haggadah. These are the kinds of proofs that the Seder Rashban brings. Next, Manishtana is a Mishnah in Pesachim. It's a Stam Mishnah. Stam Mishnah is who? Rabbi Meir. Where did Rabbi Meir learn from? Rabbi Akiva. Where did Rabbi Akiva learn from? Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus. Nowhere in the whole Gemara does it ever say what Avodim Hayinu is. All it says are the two words, Avodim Hayinu. But it doesn't say the end of it. And we have in the Mechilta that Rabbi Eliezer is busy. How do you know that a bunch of Talmidei Chachamim have to learn Hilchos Pesach Tel Chatzos? Because it says Maha Eidos, that's going on the son who's a Chacham. So from there we see even Chachamim need to be Oisik B'Yitzias Mitzrayim. So then, based on whose drasha do we have that afilu kulanu chachamim, kulanu nevoinim, kulanu yodim es haTorah? That comes from Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus. Very interesting. He brings 11 proofs of this nature that the author of Haggadah Shel Pesach was Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus. Next, the Haggadah of the Malbim. So the first thing you need to know is the Malbim never wrote a Haggadah. I've never tried to write a Haggadah. Somebody wrote a Haggadah in what he considered the style of the Malbim, and he sold it as the Malbim Haggadah. But in the Malbim Haggadah, the Malbim has what he calls the fundamental principle of the Haggadah, which is something Reb Schwab brings down. This is amazing. V'higadata lebincha b'yoyim hahu leimar ba'avur zeh Asa Hashem li b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim. These 7 expressions are the 7 parts of Haggadah. V'higada telebincha. Question you have to tell your son. Manishtana. B'yoyim hahu yochom erosh chodesh tamalomer b'yoyim hahu. Leimar, to say, you got to say the whole story. Mitchila oivdei avodah zarah hayavasenu. Ba'avur zeh. That's Pesach Matzah Marar. B'shasha Matzah Marar. Asa Hashem li. B'chol dar v'dar. Chayav adam l'rois has atzmai. Kilo yatsi Mitzrayim. B'tzeisi is b'tzeisi somi Mitzrayim is halal. The Malbim says like this. You want to know who wrote the Haggadah? Well, we know that the Haggadah cannot have been written before the end of the Tanoim because we have Rabbi Yehuda in the Haggadah. Which Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi. He said, Ditzach Hadash Ba'achav. So that means it could not have been earlier than Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi. And who is Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi's Talmud? Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Now, the Gemara talks about the Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. What does it mean, Mascha b'gnus Masai Meshach? What gnus? Avodah Zarah or Lavan? That means that it wasn't 100% certain in the times of Rav and Shmuel. But that means there was a Haggadah in the times of Rav and Shmuel, and it wasn't earlier than Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi. So think about it. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi was from the later of the Tanoim. He's mentioned in the Haggadah, so it had to have come after him. But Rav and Shmuel already had it. So there are only 3 generations. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi, there's Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, and there's Rav and Shmuel. Because Rav was a student of Rebbe, and Shmuel was Rebbe's doctor. So it had to be between Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi and Rav and Shmuel. Therefore, it had to have been in the times of Rebbe. And anyone who studies the Haggadah knows this is not Gemara language, it's Mishnah language. It's all Mishnais. How many Amoram are mentioned in the Haggadah? None. No Amoram. You have Rabbi Yochanan? No. You have Abai and Rava, Ravina Ravashi? No. Rish Lakish? No. There are no Amoram in the Haggadah. It's all Tanoim. So it had to have taken place in the times from the Tanoim. But after Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi and before Rav and Shmuel, says the Malbim, there's no question Rebbe put together the Haggadah. The same way he put together the Mishnah. The Haggadah is all Mishnaic terms and language and expressions. It's all Mishnah. It was written by Rebbe. That is the 8th approach. Number 9, and then number 10 is my favorite.
Why can't you say that some of these were added later? Like whoever didn't exist yet, like Rabbi Yehuda.
I mean, there was like a basic Haggadah, and then there were added. Good.
Didn't exist yet. Could have been added.
Said Torah Shabbat was in the time of Machon Torah.
Right. But maybe let's say Halach Manu was added later, and then Echamid, some of the Pizmayim were added later. Here's number 9. There's a Sefer Agadas Yaakov of Yaakov Shor. This is quoted by the Kaf HaChaim and others. He says that if you study the language of the Haggadah, it is clear it was written by the early Tanoim. Chazal tells us in Masechta Shabbos that in the aftermath of the Churban, the Tanoim went into a place called Kerem B'Yavneh. And when they went to Kerem B'Yavneh, they said, Asida Tar Shetishtakach Misra. They were afraid the Tar would be forgotten. And at that holy convocation, you had Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Nechemiah, all students of Rabbi Akiva. And you do not find any Tanoim after Rabbi Akiva, really, in the Haggadah, even though you have Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi. And what did they do in Kerem B'Yavneh? They made sure the Torah would not be forgotten. So Rabbi Yehuda wrote the Sifra, called Taras Kainim. Rabbi Shimon wrote the Sifri. Rabbi Yossi wrote Seder Olam. Rabbi Nechemiah wrote the Tosefta, to ensure the Torah would not be forgotten. Now, even though you're not allowed to write down Torah Shabbat Peh, they wrote down small things to preserve the Torah. Therefore, suggests Rabbi Yaakov Shor that since Haggadah Shal Pesach was only said once a year anyway, and it's very small, and the language of the Haggadah is very similar to the Mishnaic Hebrew, in his opinion, it was compiled when the Tanoim gathered at Kerem B'Yavneh to be Mesakein, to be able to preserve the Torah for all time. Now, that is the opinion of Rabbi Yaakov Shor. I want to go back to the approach that Rabbi Akiva wrote the Haggadah and offer you the following Haisaf, and then I'm going to tell you my favorite approach. I think it's very powerful that Rabbi Akiva wrote the Haggadah. Because why did we go down to Mitzrayim in the first place? Mechiras Yosef. Who sold Yosef? Who's most responsible? The brothers. Which ones? Shimon and Levi. Which one? Shimon. According to many, according to Megal HaMukos, Shimon was the Gilgal, Rabbi Akiva was the Gilgal of Shimon. That's why he suffered the worst fate of all the Asar Rugei Malchus. So if we went down to Mitzrayim because of Mechiras Yosef, who's responsible to get us out of Mitzrayim? Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is the tikkun for Shimon. So if anyone's going to write the Haggadah, we understand why Rabbi Akiva has got to write the Haggadah. He got to get us out of Egypt. He brought us down to Egypt in the first place. He's Shimon. He sold Yosef. So he has to take us out. And therefore, where did the most famous Seder in history take place? In whose house? Rabbi Akiva's house. Because, he's got to yank us out. Because every year we learn about Yetzias Mitzrayim, it takes us out of the Galus. And then, number 10, my friend Rabbi Rafael Ansel sent me today from Harav Hagoin, Rav Avigdor Miller, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha, who wrote the Haggadah. And Rav Miller basically said that the Haggadah Shel Pesach is like a mushroom. Huh? It's like mushrooms after a rain. After the rain, all kinds of things spread out of your field. Right? Says Rav Miller, the answer is, who is the author of Shas? Who wrote Shas? Who wrote Medrash? The Jewish people. The Jewish people. The Haggadah was created by the Jewish people. There's not one author. It's a number of things that were said by many, many, and it grew by accretion. It accumulated. And it's still growing. Now the Haggadah, you have the 42 Masois, and you have the Chaim Zimin, you have the this Kabbalistic text of Rav Shamshon Mashtapoli about the Makos, and many, many Perushim were added, and it's growing by leaps and bounds. The Haggadah keeps on getting bigger. Every year there are more and more Haggadahs. Says Rav Miller, Haggadahs today are like mushrooms after a rain. There are all kinds of sprouting. And it's not a bad idea to grace your table with all kinds of Haggadahs, because it makes it more interesting. But that's the authorship. The authorship is the Jewish people. So that's the final pshat. Who wrote the Haggadah? Klal Yisrael wrote the Haggadah. Did one person sit down and write the Haggadah with Echad Mi Yodeya and Adir Hu and Chad Gadya? Probably not. Maybe there are certain parts that are Be'ikr Tar Shabbat Peh of Rabbi Akiva. The Ikr Tar... Rashi always says, Tar Shabbat Peh is Rabbi Akiva. So maybe the Mechiltas and the Ikr Drashas, that comes from Rabbi Akiva. Did Eliyahu HaNavi contribute? According to Simcha Bun and Parshischa, Eliyahu HaNavi was a contributor. Maybe Rabban Gamliel is the author of Yacham Rosh Chodesh. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus had some contribution. But ultimately, the Haggadah Shel Pesach is somewhat of a composite of the history of the Jewish people, and until the great day that we're Zoicha to Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim, it's still Kol Hamarbe L'Saper B'Yitzias Mitzrayim Hareze Meshubach. Wishing everyone Aziz and Kosher and Pesach, Chag Kosher V'Sameach, and a good Yom Tov. Kol Tov everyone. Okay.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.